Thank you everyone for joining in. Welcome to vRealize Operations Webinar Series 2016. We're looking at part 12, which is December 2016. It's amazing that we've done 12 of these so far, and me and Simon are pretty happy to continue next year as well and look at newer stuff. And with that, I should welcome Simon. Hey Simon, how are you doing?
Very good. 12 episodes and really happy, going well. Hope everybody's still enjoying the content. So yeah, next year is going to be awesome.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for all your help in the board last month because I was not able to get through due to my changes in location. Awesome. Thank you, Simon. All right, so today we'll be talking about vRealize Operations Manager 6.4, and we'll specifically talk about what's new in the product and what are the new features which have been introduced by VMware, and understand how they can help you in your day-to-day operations. As we said before, the agenda of this series has been to help customers and users of vROps basically adopt the product, learn and understand easily in terms of what are the use cases for which they can use the product on day-to-day basis. And to be honest, the 6.4 release aligns a lot with that particular goal. And you can see that when we go through the content, you will see and realize that it's more about usability, it's more about adaptability, it's more about content rather than just specific product features. So that's great news from VMware. Right, so let me quickly get through the housekeeping items before I formally introduce myself and Simon. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions regarding the presentation or otherwise. You can use the chat window since you're muted by default. So use your chat windows to ask any questions, and we'll have a look at them periodically and at the end of the session to answer them. As I said, everybody is on mute. If you have any questions, use the chat window, and you have my email address there in case you have any.
This is my thing. I got an email Thursday.
Okay, let's move forward. I'll start with Simon Eady. Simon, would you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, yeah. So my name is Simon. I work for a consultancy called Extrovert, very much specializing in vROps at the moment. I blog at definite.co.uk with a colleague and good friend Sam. And if you want to reach out to me when I'm not doing webinars, Twitter's the best place, at Simon Eady to reach me there. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Sunny. I work for VMware. Recently moved to VMware headquarters in Palo Alto. And the first person I meet is Parag, who's in the room with me. I want to introduce him as well on this webinar. He's been a part of the engineering team working in the backdrop on getting us all the cool features which we see in the product. So Parag, welcome. I don't have your picture over here, but welcome to the webinar series.
Thanks, Tommy.
Okay, great. So let's just move forward and look at what we'll cover today. We'll be looking at vROps 6.4 and just that version, and a bunch of enhancements around 6.4, and you can see that most of those enhancements are around content. So starting with alert enhancements, looking at role-based dashboards, which will take a lot of time, I'm sure, because there's a bunch of them. Then we look at some summary pages, which is an awesome feature, and I think that basically makes the product more usable as soon as you get inside the product. We look at metric groups, which is another interesting feature, which basically helps you reduce the noise on your screen and helps you get what you need at first go. And then the most awaited Predictive DRS. That's a cool feature if you look at it, and we'll kind of discuss this today. And then also try and see if we can demo it. Upgrade paths, we want to talk about that so that you can kind of move on to 6.4 as soon as possible after viewing this webinar, and then some new management packs. I just want to highlight that demonstration is something which I want to do. I have the lab ready as well. But in case we are not able to get through because of the number of slideware I have, then we will definitely schedule a session in the coming days so that we can demo stuff as well. And then finally we'll end with the Q&A. Simon, any words for you or from you, or should I just go ahead?
No, just go ahead. I'm looking forward to seeing the predictive DRS stuff. I think that generated a lot of excitement in the community and all the new dashboards and stuff. So yeah, go for it, mate. This is going to be good.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Let's go ahead and look at the first thing, which is alert enhancements. Now, if you remember vROps 6.3, you would remember this recommendation actions homepage. Now, you can see that this homepage was giving you alerts earlier, and at the same time, it was giving you some certain suggested fixes. Now, this was basically actions which you could take either in an automated way or manually. What VMware has done is that they have not only given you the option to look at one suggested fix, but you can actually do multiple suggested fix in this drop-down. It basically means that you can just click on the drop-down under suggested fix and select the fix which you want to apply to that particular alert. Now, this gives you a possibility to have multiple automation use cases. For instance, if you have automation going on where you want to go make sure that you want to go ahead and let's say add vCPUs or 2 vCPUs or add 4 vCPUs, and you want to create certain specific actions for that, then you can go ahead and create them. And using this drop-down, you can select the action which you want and run that through automation, which I believe is pretty cool because now you have the option to do multiple set of recommended fix from a single pane of glass. So that's first enhancement, which is pretty nice. The second one is my favorite because this solves a number of use cases which I've heard from customers where they want to slice and dice alert data to understand what kind of alerts they're getting. If you look at this particular screen, you can see that you can group the alerts by definition. Which basically means that you can, if you have an alert, let's say this alert is regarding virtual machine is running out of disk space, and you want to see how many VMs or how many such alerts you've got, whether active or inactive or all the alerts together, then you can simply do that by grouping the alerts by definition. You can not only group them by definition, you can also group them by object. So you can do any kind of correlation which you want between alerts or figure out how many alerts you have or which one is the one which is causing a lot of or giving you a bunch of alerts. Now to that feature specifically, let's say you start with vROps and you have all the alerts enabled by default. Now you come to a situation where you have a bunch of alerts coming in because you've not fine-tuned your policies as we have discussed in the past. So if you want to understand about policies and fine-tuning alerts, we've done a completely dedicated session on that. Today we will not go into details of that, but what I wanted to point out to is that you do have an option to go ahead and reduce the alert noise by just one-click alert grouping. What it basically means is, let's say you figured out that you want to disable this alert which you see on your screen, which is virtual machine is violating risk profile 1 in vSphere hardening guide. You can see there are 154 such alerts. Now, given the fact that you're not even doing hardening through vROps and you're not worried about this alert, you just get an option to directly disable this particular alert from the policy. So if you click on the disable button on the top, you get two options. One is to disable all the alert in all policies or in a selected policy, which in my opinion is a great option because this allows you without going into the policy screen, without touching the policies button from the same alert management window to go ahead and disable the alerts which you want to, and at the same time disable them selectively in a policy where you want them to. This basically means that if you want to keep that alert for certain specific VMs where you want to do compliance checks, then you can keep them and disable it elsewhere. So you can see the two pop-ups on the right window where you can disable in all policies or in selected policies. When you say selected policies, you will see the list of all the effective policies which will list up in this particular screen. Right now you just see the vSphere Solutions default policy there because that's my default policy from where that screenshot is taken. What do you think about this, Simon?
Well, I've already had some customers really digging that. Mostly, I mean, the policy option is great, but that obviously needs to be used with a little bit of caution, especially if you're applying it across all of your policies. But more importantly, the biggest sort of feedback was the ability to group all of them. Certainly if you're in an environment that's quite noisy, you know, it's a fresh vROps install, or you've had it there for a while and then you upgrade to 6.4 and you've had thousands of alerts, you can just click that button. It's just so useful. And every admin that I've been speaking to that has vROps in their estate is really loving that feature. So yeah, big thumbs up. I've had a good question on it actually as well. Is there an undo button? I'm guessing that's with regards to the policies. I'm not sure if there is. Do you know if there's an undo button there?
Undo to basically enable the alert back? Not at this moment, because if you look at it, there's a statement which says you can re-enable the alert manually at any time. At this moment, there's no undo button. So yeah, you want to think about giving this privilege to the right person in your organization and not to everybody, because you don't want them to disable alerts.
I'm guessing an undo option would be pretty challenging as well, because vROps isn't going to retrospectively know everything that well, it might be able to, but I would imagine that would be quite challenging to keep track of, especially if you are doing it for some policies or one policy, so on. At this point, you probably just want to keep a close eye on it, but as Sonny says, you know, you give it to the right person to do it, so you don't just do it carte blanche.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that undo button sounds really cool, though. And I have that registered in the back of my head now, so we'll talk about that. All right. Moving forward, one critical aspect of vROps 6.3 was the summary page, where you can actually see the summary of an object, right? But the challenge was that if you look at applications, or if you look at a business context itself, which you create mostly in vSphere with folders or application names, that business context is pretty limited to vROps. You can see those folders in vROps, but you can't do much up till 6.3. But when you look at 6.4, there is a specific summary page for folders, which basically just points out to any alerts which are there on the children of that particular folder. Now, this folder could be an application, it could be a function, it could be a tier, it could be a department, it could be an environment like test, dev, gold, silver, etc. Now, this basically helps you if you are exposing vROps to end users or application users or just VM admins. If you're doing that, then it becomes really easy for you to, let's say, give all the marketing VMs to the marketing team IT guy, who's basically first level of contact for them, and he can look at those virtual machines in the context with any recommended actions around that. He can look at all the virtual machines or all the alerts which are related to that particular or those particular set of applications. So again, there could be a number of use cases, and you can use it as you like it, but this is a pretty strong feature, because now you kind of slicing data as per business context, which helps at the end of the day. So that's one of the features which I like as well, because it helps you show only what you care for and not everything else in the system. The next one is a big one. I know there are a couple of people who've been in our webinar series, especially Ivan, who has contributed to this a lot, and Parag sitting in the team has given substantial contributions to this as well, where we've been able to get some new role-based dashboards to help troubleshooting. Now, this was always a request to have new dashboards, better dashboards, and I think somebody at VMware heard, and they've got at least kickstarted or get you kickstarted with some stuff which is really cool. And I'll kind of point out to those dashboards, and later we can do a tour if time permits. So the first thing which you notice is that there is infrastructure dashboards, the first red box which you can see. Now, it clearly defines that there are, and then there's a VM dashboards, right? So you can see two major columns there. So here, it clearly specifies that you have an infrastructure layer, which is which we call as kitchen in a restaurant, and then there's a VM or a virtual machine layer, which we call as dining area in a restaurant. So this ideology or this analogy was basically built by Ivan, where they describe about or talk about kitchen and restaurant. So we're basically putting a line. If you are an infrastructure as a service provider, then you'll be looking primarily at the infrastructure side of things and look at infrastructure dashboards. And if you are a virtual machine admin, then you might want to look at VM dashboards and or help your application guys look at VM dashboards, etc. So within those, you have specific categorization. You have cluster configuration, cluster performance, data store capacity, data store performance, ESXi configuration, and network configuration. So you can see that the first level of dashboards which are out here are talking about configurations, performance, and capacity. So these three major pillars. And then if you look at the virtual machine, which basically do the utilization on any virtual infrastructure, we are showing the heavy hitters, the configurations, and the usage of virtual machines. So around 6 and 3.9 dashboards which are added to this release, which basically make it super awesome. Now this is something where if you want to do deep troubleshooting or if you want to understand usage patterns, etc., or configuration patterns. But if you want really an overview of your environment, then you also have an operations overview dashboard, a capacity overview dashboard, and then a troubleshoot VM dashboard. And I will go through them as we go forward. I think it's important that we understand the logic behind these dashboards, though they're very simple to follow, but we'll still try to run through them so that you can use them on day-to-day basis. Then if you're wondering where the old dashboards are, which were already there in the system and you were using them, they're still in the system. They've just been placed under the other folder, and you can see that highlighted on the top right on this screen. Okay, so the first thing first, which you would notice, is the Getting Started dashboard. Now, this is a new dashboard which has been added to the system. I think the idea behind this dashboard was to go ahead and give you a quick explanation of what each dashboard can be used for. And this, I think it's really good because you can now go ahead and give vROps to a new person in your team who doesn't understand the tool completely, but you've been giving him a task to troubleshoot certain things or look at level 1 type of tickets. Then he can come over here and understand the use case for the dashboard and understand, by going through the description, understand how he can use that specific dashboard and for what specific use cases. So this is the Getting Started page. I think I can see this page can be used or developed further to point at your personal dashboards as well, and that will be really awesome if we could reach that. Then, if you look at the first dashboard after getting started, it's the Operations Overview dashboard. Now, this is a good summary of the overall environment which is being monitored by vRealize Operations Manager in your infrastructure. Now, you can see that this dashboard starts with an inventory summary, which basically gives you a highlight of how many VMs, how many powered off VMs, number of clusters, hosts, and data stores. These set of metrics are most liked by customers and data center admins and VPs and so on and so forth, because they want to know what kind of infrastructure they're running and what is the overall capacity they're running on. Then this dashboard allows you to select a data center. So let's say if you select the cloud data center, it basically gives you the uptime of your cloud data center. Now, when you look at the term uptime, it's being calculated every 5 minutes, and if any of the resources under the data center goes down, the uptime will fluctuate accordingly. And then you see the alert volume widget, which is on the right hand side. So it kind of gives you what are the active, warning, and critical alerts in your system, or critical, immediate, and warning alerts in your system. How many are active? What has been the history for the past 1 week for alerting? It kind of tells you what's the health of your infrastructure or your data center from an alert perspective. Then the other thing which you notice at the bottom of the screen is some performance characterization of your data center, which basically explains that what are the top 15 virtual machines which are experiencing contention from a CPU perspective, memory perspective, and disk latency. So this kind of gives you the virtual machines which are being impacted in your system. Now, make sure you understand CPU contention, memory contention, and disk latency before you start taking actions and troubleshooting, because you might have very minimal memory contention, like in this case you have 0.11, which doesn't mean anything in most of the cases. So it's important that you understand what are the thresholds, and based on that take decisions in terms of if you need to go and troubleshoot or figure out why those VMs are suffering from CPU, memory, or disk resources. So that's the first operations overview dashboard. Simon, do you have any comments on that? Have you used it so far?
I've had a couple of customers using it, and what it did was it led to ideas for other dashboards that they wanted to see that went into development, essentially. So, you know, the content there is superb, but they were like, okay, can I have the same for my hosts, and so on. You know, they're fantastic. I've already had a comment in the chat window there that some people are using them. They're finding them useful, or their customers are finding them useful as well. So that's what I've got to say about that.
All right. Okay, that's good. So at least it's getting them started in terms of what they would want to see and how they can customize their own dashboards, which I believe is the idea behind this. Great. Okay, let's look at the out-of-the-box capacity overview dashboard. Now, this is another one which is pretty similar to dashboards which we have done in the past through custom dashboards on our blogs, but this one kind of helps you understand the utilization trends as well. So the idea is simple. You select a particular cluster in your environment, and as soon as you select that, in this case there are data centers, so as soon as you select that, you will see the number of ESX servers, clusters, data stores, and running VMs on them. That's the inventory piece. Then you can look at the capacity piece on the top right hand side in terms of how many CPU cores, how much physical memory, and how much physical capacity of storage you have over there. Then you can basically look at what is the utilization trends from a memory, CPU, and disk space perspective. So you can pretty much expand those widgets and understand what your utilization has been for the past 1 week and what is the future forecast for a week. Now, you have the option to click on any of those icons or calendar icons or clock icons to change those timings if you want to understand trends from the past more than 7 days. Then it also talks about if you have reclaimable capacity from a powered off VM perspective or snapshots perspective. So you see those two metrics plotted there, which kind of tell you if you have capacity which can be reclaimed so that you can use them more effectively. And then you have options to look at what is underutilized from a capacity utilization distribution perspective. So that kind of gives you the DRS kind of widget, which shows you what exactly is the capacity utilization of each of the containers, whether it's data stores, clusters, or virtual machines, or ESX servers. So all capacity overview in this one box. So kind of helps you understand the capacity from data center to data center level. And to Simon's point, you can use a similar dashboard or create a similar dashboard from a cluster perspective as well to get a more granularity into your clusters.
This is quite a popular one as well. One of the key features from back in the day with vROps was the capacity planning. That was something that was almost unique to the product. And people like to be able to do this quite quickly. And with older, even older versions of vRops, you had to kind of work your way through if you wanted to go through to the inbuilt systems for capacities with projects. So this just makes it easier and more accessible. And anything that can save time and make your life easier, that's the whole point. So this is, again, something awesome.
All right, great. Okay, so the next one is Troubleshoot a VM. So this is, again, showing how you can simplify the whole troubleshooting process with vROps, which is kind of a black art if you look at troubleshooting a virtual machine or performance of a virtual machine in a virtual infrastructure, because there are so many moving parts. But this dashboard kind of puts those parts together, gives you a storyline or a workflow through which you can go from step number 1 till step number 7, and then go beyond that to see how you can further troubleshoot. So it kind of guides you across your infrastructure and helps you troubleshoot a VM. There are multiple use cases. If your virtual machines are slow, you have any known critical issues, you want to find out what kind of virtual machine it is it Windows, you want to see whether demand is spiking, etc. So if you want to work through the flow, on the left-hand side, you see all the virtual machines you have in your infrastructure. And you can search for a specific VM. So let's say you got a call from someone, and he says that his VM is working slow, and the name of the VM is BNA-West. You search for BNA-West, and you immediately get the virtual machine in the left window on number 1 widget. You can see the tags associated to it. So if there is a business tag associated in vSphere, that will show up over here. So let's say if this is SRM protected VM, or if this is a virtual machine which belongs to compliance team or security team, etc. All those vSphere tags will be shown here. Then you can see which folder they belong to. So this is another popular categorization within vSphere. So you can see what folder they're on, what host they're running on, and so on and so forth. There are some bunch of attributes which are shown in that widget which are pretty useful. Then on the top right-hand side, you immediately jump onto number 2, which is about the VM. It basically explains you what exactly the VM is all about from a configuration standpoint. You can see the number of CPU, memory, guest operating system, whether the tools are running or not, and then some storage-related stats in terms of utilization. Then if you have any critical alerts, they point out on page number 3 or widget number 3, which basically helps you figure out that, okay, my virtual machine might be slow because there's a lot of CPU usage going on in the VM, and that could be causing stress, and so on and so forth. Or it might be running out of disk space, or it might be facing contention if you have that alert configured. And then you can kind of see the related objects to that virtual machine so that you can see if any of them in the system is red. So for instance, if a data store is running out of disk space and your virtual machine, or let's say it's full, and your virtual machine is not able to take snapshots, or it's powered off, or it's unresponsive, then you know that because your data store is full, the VMs are kind of going crazy on that. So that's one of the use cases. And there can be a bunch of other use cases here. Or let's say the virtual machine is dropping packets, and then you see that the ESX server is red, and you figure out that, oh, the network cards on the ESX servers have conked off. So you can see that in the related objects window. And then you have other options. So let's say if you're not able to figure out what's going on, then you can further go ahead and look into the demand of the VMs. Is this abnormal or is it normal? You can look at, is the VM facing contention from a CPU, memory, or disk perspective? You can look at if the parent cluster where the VM is running has contention. And then you can also find out attributes around the host and the cluster of that particular VM, or where that particular VM belongs to. So kind of if I look back at troubleshooting use cases which we have discussed during the webinar series, and also kind of talk about my experience with customers and interactions with them, this particular dashboard kind of summarizes all of that together and helps you select one object and move further in different directions, which is kind of a fishbone analysis approach to troubleshooting. I like it. I mean, it's refreshing to see that you do not have to be a VMware guru or a vROps guru to go ahead and do troubleshooting with vROps. Simon, I would like you to comment.
So, yeah, I mean, this gives, if you are using your vROps in a tiered approach with your engineers and you had first and second line engineers, this is the kind of, it's the one-stop shop. You don't have to go anywhere else. You just select the VM that you know or the object that's having issues, and they can have a pretty good idea of what's going on straight from here without having to navigate around. So from a NOC point of view or people who are on call, this is just, another really fantastic addition.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy looking at all these one by one and describing them makes me pretty excited. Okay, let's look at some more. Let's look at some more because I know we're limited on time and we have a bunch of things to cover. So some of the out-of-the-box dashboards on configuration. Again, if you have somebody who loves data and tries to correlate data and understand what's going on in the environment with summary graphs, then this is a great one because it talks about your cluster configurations, your ESXi configurations, any defects within them, your virtual machine configurations, and your network configurations, all in a single page. So you get onto any of those dashboards and you get a bunch of information which is useful information. So this kind of filters out what you want or what you need to see versus what all you have to see, which is kind of good. And I will see if we can run through some of these dashboards as we go into the live environment. Then we have the infrastructure dashboard for performance. So you can see that there are two. One is the data store performance, and the other is the cluster performance. So this basically, again, kind of deep dives. Well, once you move from the operations overview, you've looked at a VM, and now you realize that it's a cluster level performance or a data store level performance issue. Then you can come into these dashboards and kind of drill down further to see what are those key performance indicators which you need to worry about for those particular objects. Then I think capacity is the most famous one from a data source perspective. You talk to any admin, they are worried about when I will run out of capacity on my data stores, and so that I can talk to my storage guy, make sure I have new LUNs available, etc., etc. This particular dashboard gives you that summary. It tells you, it basically sizes data store by capacity, so you know which are the bigger ones in your environment, and then basically color them by utilization, so you know when you're running out of disk space, etc. You also have the option to select a data store and look at the usage trend for that data store along with snapshot space, which is amazing, and then the used space. So you can get the total capacity, which is the top blue line here, if you focus on the graph at the bottom right-hand corner. Then you get the used capacity, which is the light blue line, and then you get the snapshot space. And for each of them, you can get a trend and a forecast. So if you have any dash or data store here, which is red, you basically select that data store in the heat map on the top. You will automatically get all the virtual machines of that data store in the bottom left-hand widget, and you will also get the usage trend on the bottom right-hand widget. So this kind of tells you, okay, here's my data store, which is red. I see these are the VMs which are there. There are a bunch of VMs which are powered off on that because the power state is 0. And I might be able to just delete those VMs and get some space back from that data store. Or I might be able to delete some snapshots on those VMs and get some space back from the data store. And this kind of helps you identify those kind of issues, right? So you can quickly identify overutilized data stores, compare the configured data store's capacity, and also look at the KPIs of the virtual machines which are relevant to that particular data store. So I think it solves a bunch of use cases around capacity management for data stores and for virtual machines. Right, some other important ones, a heavy hitter for VM's dashboard basically points out who's the guy who's doing the most amount of IOPS and who's the guy who's doing the most amount of network throughput. So if you want to find out those noisy neighbors in your infrastructure, then you can find them out by looking at this particular dashboard. And then a simple VM usage dashboard, which I believe is mostly a reporting requirement where people want to see how my VM is doing from a CPU, memory, IOPS, and network I/O perspective. So you search for that VM and you'll be able to get the configuration about that VM and then the basic CPU, memory, IOPS, and network information or utilization. You can simply email that information to somebody if you want to, or you can keep comparing trends if you have to troubleshoot these key metrics, all in those two dashboards. Moving on, talking about the VM configuration dashboard, you can basically look at what kind of VMs you have which are greater than 8 vCPUs. So you might want to keep an eye on them and see if you want to reduce that number as much as possible. That will help you make sure that you do not have large VMs which are causing contention or crossing NUMA boundaries. Then you have VMs which are greater than 24 GB of RAM, again finding out which are the big VMs, and then VMs with greater than 400 GB of disk. So you are kind of segregating them if you want for reporting purposes or tracking purposes. And then if you look at the widgets at the bottom, they are pretty awesome. I'll not be able to go through all of them, but you can see that they've been carefully crafted, because you can see if there are any VMs with limits configured, then they will pop up in that widget if you expand it. Any VMs which are orphaned, they will automatically pop up. Any VM which are running out of disk space, they will pop up. Any VMs which are using a non-standard operating system name, which can pretty much mess up any of your reports, then they will pop up. VMs which have greater than 1 NIC will pop up. So if you were sure that you have one single NIC on all your VMs, but they're showing 2, then you should be able to list them out. VMs with snapshot, which are less than or greater than 2 GB, they will pop up automatically. Right, so this basically gives you out of the box overview of your entire virtual machine landscape for various different use cases. Right, so I don't want to comment or ask. So I don't want to go through each one of. I would like to go through each one of them during the live demo. So let's see if we can pop up some of those widgets from our live demo. All right, with that, we covered the second topic, which was the dashboards. Now, the third topic here is the summary pages. So this is pretty awesome. This is an overhaul of the product, I would say, because this kind of helps you remove all the noise and get you right on the money. So let's say if you have an object which is a virtual machine object, or a cluster, or a data store, or a host system, and you select that object, and you can see that in this particular page, right? As soon as I select that VM, which is BWHAN app3, I get a summary page. So instead of getting all the pages like summary, troubleshooting, analytics, etc., I'm just getting this one summary page here along with the all metric page. And the summary page is giving me the recommended actions. So if I have to do any specific task on that particular virtual machine immediately, it talks about any kind of alerts. And I have a better slide for this one. Let me just put it up. Okay, here you go. So you can see that I'm getting these recommended actions on, in this case, it's a cluster. I'm getting the about me, which gives me the properties of the cluster, whether DRS is enabled or not, whether HA is enabled or not, etc. And any critical known alert, if it's there, I'm getting the inventory about those clusters in terms of how many VMs, how many hosts, how many data stores. I'll get the performance metrics about that particular cluster in terms of what is the maximum amount of CPU contention, memory contention, or disk latency we can see on those clusters or faced by virtual machines on that cluster. And then we can also see the host distribution by CPU memory and VM distribution by CPU memory and latency. So along with the utilization of that cluster, the CPU workload, memory workload, and the IOPS. So this is kind of giving you all about that cluster on a single page, and basically whatever you need from a perspective of troubleshooting or capacity management or configuration management for that matter. So Simon, have you been able to look at the summary pages for the virtual machines and clusters?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were looking at, not so much the summary page ironically, but right at the top there, the tab where it says all metrics, that one's been really useful because when you select that, you can then choose, it automatically brings up the list of available metrics or properties for that particular object that you're looking at, and you simply double click what you want and it populates it on the right hand side, again specifically for that object. So it's a very good and quick way of viewing metrics for given objects without essentially creating a custom dashboard for that. So it helps, very helpful for troubleshooting.
Yep, we'll go through that. We'll try and actually that's my next slide right here. So that's what Simon is talking about. So as soon as you click on all metrics, you see the key metrics rather than seeing everything. So you can see in this case, as soon as I clicked on all metrics for that BNA West VM, I can see the CPU, disk space, memory, network, and storage metrics. And if I click on the plus sign next to them or double click on that group itself, I will see only the key CPU metrics which matter to me right there. The key disk space metric, the key memory metrics, and so on and so forth. Now, that makes your life so easy because you don't have to dig through or search for the key metrics, especially if you don't know what to search for. And that automatically gets you the chart and correlates them for you for those particular metrics. Then you also have the all metrics option. So if you want to go and dig into the guard mode, or you want to go ahead and get all the metrics regarding that particular object like you used to do in the previous versions, then you can do that as well. The cool thing which is coming in this window, this page again, which has been added, is all properties. Now, if you remember, you couldn't see properties here earlier under troubleshooting all metrics, but now you can see all the properties right on this page, and those can be really, really helpful because you can easily do correlations around, okay, which host it's running on, which cluster it is a part of, which data store it's running on, etc. And all that is part of all properties itself. But if you have learned all the other tabs from the past, then you do have the option to open that up so that the brackets over there, the cool ones, if you click on them, you will basically unhide the entire menu and you will be able to see the old page like all metrics, alerts, analysis, troubleshooting, detail, environment, so on and so forth. So if you want to go ahead and look at all those tabs because you understand and you've learned over a period of time on how to use those tabs and you want more details around specific areas, then you can still be able to, or you still be able to go into them and look at those areas. This, in my opinion, removes a lot of clutter, gives you what is required out of the box for you, and then if you want to go into more deeper analysis, then you can go ahead and expand that and look into that stuff as well, which I believe is pretty nice. Okay, so with that, these were all the UI enhancements you can see, and they're mostly around content, which is usability of the product. There's something which has changed dramatically for DRS as well, and which is basically called Predictive DRS. So if you look at approaches to avoid contention, which is the biggest cause for performance issues, there are many, or not many, but probably these two approaches which you see in a virtual infrastructure. The first is in a vSphere environment, a vSphere distributed resource scheduler, which is DRS, which we are aware of, right? It is a reactive approach which makes sure that if you see contention going on in a cluster, you basically run an algorithm every 5 minutes to make sure that you can relieve the cluster or the host from that contention by moving the virtual machines around within that cluster. So cluster is the boundary for DRS. Then if you want to balance, then you can use workload placement or WLP with vROps, which works in conjunction with DRS and allows you to place virtual machines by balancing them across clusters. Basically helps you mitigate risks, attempts to prevent any kind of hotspots in your infrastructure, and helps you from a huge potential operational overhead, basically, which means that somebody needs to manually move around virtual machines, but helps you balance. It's not guaranteed that it will be giving you the best performance always, but again, it's better than a reactive approach. And the third option, which is declared or which is announced with this particular version of vROps, is the Predictive DRS. Now, this basically means that we'll use vSphere DRS and vRealize Operations Manager to predict the future demand, and basically use this with minimal overhead to move VMs across the hosts primarily, because DRS does that in a cluster before the contention starts. So if you look at it, it basically means that we are looking at all the three methods which are available for you to make sure that you can avoid contention. First is to fix existing contention, which is DRS. The second is to try to avoid contention by balancing as much as possible. But again, balancing is just point in time. But if you want to really understand the pattern of a particular workload and apply that science or learned behavior into DRS, then you can use Predictive DRS, which basically makes the entire process more predictive and easy to understand. The secret sauce behind Predictive DRS is dynamic threshold. Dynamic threshold is a part of the product, which is vROps, and it basically learns the normal behavior of a particular metric, and based on that normal behavior, which it's learned through different algorithms which run hourly, daily, and monthly patterns, this particular data can be utilized by feeding it into DRS. Now, what it basically means is, let's say on June 17, 6:26 p.m. or a.m. for that matter, the virtual machine which I'm using goes to 90% CPU demand. And this happens every single day because there's a batch job which runs at that particular time. Now, with this data being available in vROps, if we can push this data back to vSphere and tell DRS within vSphere that make sure that this particular virtual machine, which within the next 1 hour will go to 90% CPU demand, is sitting on a container which can provide all those resources without impacting the others on that box, and could you please go ahead and do that placement 1 hour ahead of schedule? It sounds pretty crazy, but it is possible now with 6.4 because it is completely automated, and I'll show you through the configuration screens in terms of how it is configured. So this is exactly the use case which I was explaining on this particular slide. It goes ahead and looks at the pattern, is what each VM is going to do every day, and what VMs are on each host, and how big each host is. And then it will go ahead and proactively prepare the host for the increased demand even before the demand occurs. And you can see that over here, that the blue line is the observed line, which I have observed today. And let's say tomorrow I would automatically have a red line which will tell me what would be my resource demand an hour before the prediction or the actual demand kicks in, and allow me to go ahead and move across workloads within my cluster to be ready for that 1 hour ahead of demand which is coming in, which has been observed before. Now, this is essentially how Predictive DRS works, right? Now, it's just completely integrated with DRS, vSphere DRS, so vROps doesn't play any role in placing or moving the VMs. It just tells DRS what to do. and DRS uses all that intelligence from dynamic thresholding to go ahead and move across VMs. And the resource utilization trends are observed by vROps and sent to vSphere DRS. Predictive demands of workloads are incorporated into vSphere DRS algorithms. So, so to be honest, there's a lot of development effort which has changed both these features in order to work well together. And it's very, so looking at the data flow, the vROps basically runs a nightly DT calculation. Now that is dynamic threshold. By default, it's at 2 a.m. local time of that vROps deployment. Once that DT is calculated, the forecasted data is sent to Predictive DRS, or for Predictive DRS to VMware vCenter server. And this is done at 6 a.m. So that handoff happens at 6 a.m. And we basically check to see if vCenter server is configured to send PDRS data, checks which clusters are enabled for PDRS, and grabs 24 hours of forecasting data for each virtual machine. One CPU metric is basically a 5 minutes average, and one memory metric, which is non-zero active memory, again a 5 minutes average. Then vSphere DRS consumes the forecasted data for those set of containers where PDRS is enabled, and then goes ahead and leverages that for each cluster every 5 minutes. So it leverages the forecasted data when making moves, initial placement, and load balancing decisions. So you can see there's a lot of work which has gone into this, and it being able to do what it's doing is pretty awesome. You might be thinking how to configure it. I was surprised to see that it's very, very simple to configure. So when you configure your vCenter adapter for collection of data, you simply say whether you want to enable or you want the predictive DRS to work or not. So you say true or false. And set it to true basically means we are enabling that particular adapter instance or for that vCenter server to go ahead and utilize predictive DRS data, which will be a communication going from vROps to vCenter server. On the vCenter side of things, again, very, very simple. The same widget or same dialog box which you use to turn on vSphere DRS, just go into that and enable predictive DRS. When you do that, in addition to real-time metrics, DRS will respond to forecasted metrics provided by vROps. You must also configure the predictive DRS in the version of vROps which is supported, which I showed you in the previous screen. So as simple as checking a box. So you check these two boxes, check this one and set up true on the other one, and make sure you have the right versions, and you're good to go. So you can see this is a cluster level setting. So if you do not want predictive DRS to work on a specific cluster, where you don't want to move workloads because you think it's your big data cluster or SAP cluster or Oracle databases, then you can choose not to migrate or use predictive DRS for those particular virtual machines. If you have an environment where you want to do it because you care about your workloads, and these workloads are pretty bursty in nature, with specific patterns, then this is a great feature, because you don't even have to think about doing balancing or doing placements later on in a reactive mode, because this will automatically take care of everything. All right, some important things to notice, that you can see the predictive DRS data being sent under the adapter setting itself. So if you click on that icon which gives you the collection notifications, it tells you whether the vROps is sending data to the vCenter or not, and if that connection is broken for some reason, you will get a red exclamation right over there, so you know that your predictive DRS will not work at that point of time. But DRS will continue to work as it does. There are connection limits, so it's important to learn and understand this. vRealize Operations Manager can send data to multiple vCenter instances, as we know. vCenter server can only receive data from one vROps instance. So let's say if you have a vCenter server, which for some joy or fun you have registered to multiple vROps instances, the vCenter can only receive data through one vROps instance for doing predictive DRS and not from multiple, because you do not want a split brain scenario for sure. In case vROps are predicting differently based on how the DT has been calculated or how long they have been running or how far apart they have been from a perspective of age. So if you do that, you will basically get this simple warning which will tell you that if this particular vCenter is already registered, so let's say I'm trying to register the second vROps instance, it will switch over to the second one and disable the first one from getting DRS data from dynamic thresholds. Again, you can see that if you do that by mistake, or if you want to do that, then be prepared for this red box which will talk about that, okay, you have another vROps instance which is kind of sending data to this vCenter, hence I cannot. So the only way to solve this would be to unregister and run through one vCenter. Now, if you're not using predictive DRS at all, and you're not worried about this feature, you can still, or even if you're worried about this feature, you want to make sure that you keep one vROps as the source of truth, and you can still continue to have multiple vROps monitoring the single vCenter if you have a specific use case for that. I think that people do it in labs. But yeah, if you have that in production while you're switching from one version of vROps to another, etc., be happy to use that. I mean, there's no limit to not use that feature with introduction of predictive DRS. This is important. So at this moment when this product is released, last month actually, you can have PDRS enabled on a cluster which has less than 4,000 VMs. 3,999 is good, but 4,000 is the magic number. That's the limit, scalability limit today, which might increase in the future releases is what is being said in the release notes as well. So make sure that you do not go beyond that number for a given cluster. If you have a 16-node cluster, might be, let's say even if you have a 32-node cluster, you might not be close to that number, which is 4,000, quite a big number, but yeah, something to note of. All right, so before I move on to upgrade and compatibility, I want to know from Simon if this was helpful from perspective of understanding predictive DRS.
Absolutely. I haven't yet. I mean, because it's brand new, and there's a dependency there on having vCenter 6.5.
Yep.
I haven't yet met anyone that's adopting it right now in the wild, but that doesn't mean it hasn't turned some heads. I've been to a few customers since the release of 6.4 and 6.5 and this whole integration piece. There are a lot of people are taking some serious notice of it. They're having to carefully think about it. I mean, the limits there for some of my customers isn't such an issue, but the whole thing of being able to target clusters specifically was very beneficial, very helpful. So it's given certainly the people I've been speaking to a lot of ideas on how they can protect their applications in environment even better, making sure that the VMs get the performance they need when they need it. As you were talking about, burstable type of CPU usage. So if it's once a day or 2 or 3 times a day when they're redlining, it's making sure that it gets the resources when it needs it. So yeah, it's spot on.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so let's see how we can get to vROps 6.4 and how easy it is or how difficult it is. Okay, so from an upgrade perspective, vROps 6.3 was the last version with XDB. So we know XDB is something which VMware is trying to deprecate from the previous releases since 6.1 onwards. And with 6.4 coming into picture, the XDB is completely eliminated with Cassandra and vPostgres databases. Which is good news because XDB was kind of a black box database, but Cassandra and vPostgres are easy to understand, open standards, etc. So that's kind of nice because I'm sure that'll give better performance as well with 6.4. If you want to upgrade to 6.4 from 6.0 or 6.1, you're out of luck because you cannot. You need to first go to 6.0 So if you're on 6.0 or 6.1, you should upgrade to 6.3 and then 6.4. That's basically a step upgrade to ensure that you get rid of the XDB components, which we got rid during 6.3 upgrades. And then if you are already running on 6.2 or 6.2.1, you should go directly to 6.4 and skip 6.3 there. So 6.0, 6.1, go to 6.3 and then 6.4. 6.2, 6.2.1, directly go to 6.4. Simple. And then if you have upgrade issues, there are a bunch of, not a bunch, but probably there is a KB article there which talks about certain issues which are related to the upgrade. So that's good to know. New releases which have already been released, one off yesterday, which was, or actually Friday, which was the management pack for vSAN, which is the new one which has been released. Pretty awesome in terms of what it does from a performance management and alerting perspective for vSAN components. And a week back, there was a SDDC health management pack which was released, and both of them are actually compatible with 6.4 and some of the older versions as well. We'll not go there right now. But with that, I think I have covered the piece which I wanted to show from a slideware perspective. And we are on the hour. Let's see if I can show you the UI. Okay, there you go. Okay, so you can see that I have, let me just, I'm still trying to learn Mac. Third word problem.
Click the green icon there, mate, on the top left corner. That one there, yeah. There you go.
Okay, awesome. I remember the first time I was using Mac 4 years ago, I opened up a page and I was like, how do I minimize this? Because I was looking at things on the top right hand corner. But yeah, all right. Okay, thanks, Simon. All right, so when I go to the home, you get this home page, which we discussed, and if you can see, we talked about multiple action items. So you can see I can apply any suggested fix over here in this environment on this specific virtual machine with multiple options being here. All right, so okay, so moving on, you can see that the dashboard list which I spoke about. In this environment, we've configured a bunch of dashboards, but what you need to look at is this one, the vSphere dashboard library. In your case, you will see straight away this page, the infrastructure dashboards, which we were discussing, the other dashboards, which are the previous dashboards in vSphere 6.3 and beyond, and before that, and then VM dashboards, the three new ones, the heavy hitters, VM configuration, VM usage. And then you have the capacity overview, getting started. You start here, which is the getting started page, which I showed you earlier. Pretty fast and snappy. You can see it explains you all the dashboards which are there. If you want to disable this getting started, you can. So you can just go to actions and you can disable it or remove from the dashboards menu, basically, if you want to. But I would suggest you keep it, especially for newbies in your team, and if you want to look at understanding how dashboards are used. Then if you go into the first one, which is the operations overview, we discussed this. You can see that this is my environment where I'm running quite a number of VMs, etc. And then I can select any of the data centers here, understand the availability or uptime in those data centers, understand the alert volumes, and then look at top 15 VMs experiencing CPU contention, memory contention, and disk latency right on this page itself. That's the operations overview. So pretty much as an operations guy, if I come in and I want to figure out what's going on in my data center, the use case is pretty simple. I come every morning, look at the overall summary, understand each of the data centers, understand what are the alert volumes there, understand if there have been any downtimes while I was sleeping in the bed. And then if there are any VMs which are experiencing high amount of CPU memory contention or disk latency. And if they are there any actions which I could take to solve those particular issues. So that's the operations overview. And you have a troubleshoot a VM. I do want to run over this one before we call it a day. So here let's say I search for a VM, which is this one. I can see that the virtual machine has 2 CPUs, 4 GB of RAM. It's running Windows Server 2008 R2. The guest tools are running, which is good. Use space is around 38%, and there's a snapshot here, or there was a snapshot size of 13.76 GB. Now you can see that if there are any critical alerts on this VM, I will be seeing them here, and I can see the related objects over here. I can see the host, and if I want, I can see the alerts of that particular host as well. If I want to go further and jump into that, etc. I can see the function which I have associated with them and the health of that function, or directly that particular function itself. Then I can see which is the VM demand spiking or abnormal. Oh no, it's not. Actually not in this case, because this is just a VM which is sitting in my lab. It has very minimal CPU demand, memory workload, and you can also see the amount of IOPS I'm doing across all the virtual disks in this VM and the network I/O usage. Once I'm happy and satisfied looking at that, I can look at the contention data and see if there is any CPU contention, memory contention, disk latency, or packets dropped from a network perspective, right? And once I have done that, I can also look at if the parent cluster or the parent data store has any issues going on. So in this case, I can see the parent cluster has a max CPU contention of around 13%, no memory contention, so I'm good with memory, and the parent data store has very minimal latency going on, which is red is the pink one is the write, and the red one is the read latency. So it kind of tells me what's going on there. And then I can look at the parent host in terms of what the hosts have been over here. So you can see this is the current host which is running, and then you can look at the parent cluster as well for this particular virtual machine. So you can see that you have a bunch of information, and I can probably talk for an hour with different use cases which can be used here to showcase what this dashboard can do. Yeah, I would let you play through in your environments and see how you can understand and learn more about this dashboard. Okay, with that, I think we are around 5 to 7 minutes ahead, or 10 minutes in fact. So I would stop here and see if there are any questions from you, Simon, or from anybody else on the webinar. I don't know. I think there are not many people on today, but
yeah. So we've had one really great question. So it's from Beng, and he's saying, is there any chance of being able to see orphan snapshots like we can see in the RV tools? Do we know if that's something we can do in 6.4, or if we know if that's coming?
I've heard about coming, but that specific is not in 6.4. I know what you mean. You are talking about running RV tools on your systems and find out all the orphan disks, or zombie disks as they call them. No, that's not there yet, but I've heard that that's something which might be on the list for them to put it on.
That's the only questions we've got. For me, it's a fantastic overview of 6.4. One thing that I would take away from that as a consultant is that this is just making the product more accessible in an even quicker, in a much sort of shorter space of time. A lot of the time when you're deploying this sort of product, even if you're just the customer or if you're getting someone in to do it, you know, there's often a requirement for a lot of custom dashboard work, and some of that work is being reduced, which is for many people a lot easier, because usually the custom dashboard requirements are, you know, they want overviews of specific objects like clusters, or they want to be able to troubleshoot VMs better, or they want access to data but not in the way it's currently being presented. Well, all those new dashboards are giving you those options very quickly. So yeah, I'm just seeing it's just strength to the product. and making it much more accessible in a much quicker, in a much shorter space of time. So you get your return of investment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's really great. It's fantastic release 6.4.
Right. Awesome. Yep, I agree. I completely agree. I think the only difference, or I think the biggest difference between all of the products and solutions which you use on day-to-day basis versus something which helps you do operations is that more time you give it, the more you get back from it. But a better product is something which can reduce that time as much as possible. And I think with this release, you can see that time to operationalize or time to market is pretty awesome and pretty fast, because you get a lot of things out of the box which you can start applying immediately. So hopefully this session and the recording would help people to understand and learn more about vROps 6.4 and start troubleshooting issues from day number 1.
There's one more question that's come in. I think I know the answer to it, but I'll pose it to you. Does the Predictive DRS have the ability to move across clusters, or is it just within a cluster?
So for going across cluster, you will be using WLP, which is workload placement. Predictive DRS, since it's passing on data to DRS, it'll be only within the cluster, because DRS has a boundary of cluster. Now, the question leads to a very good option which you can use. If you have a cluster where DRS is kind of tired because it's already tried moving stuff across, but it's not helping because the cluster is it's already full and there's no way to safeguard your workloads, then is the time when you will start looking at workload placement, or WLP, which basically helps you move across clusters. So that's where the reactive, proactive, and balance approach comes in. So that's the time when you would start doing
that's
balance.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. That's the last question.
All right. With that, I will stop sharing, and thank you once again for joining in, and we'll see you in the new year. You want to talk about the next year plans, Simon?
Yeah, so it's still early days. We're going to take a break in January, so there won't be anything in January. Both me and Sunny will be busy. But come February, we will start 2017 from there forward. So we're looking forward to it. We'll be bringing you more of, what's new and how to get more out of it. We'll be getting guests in, guys who are really hot in their particular areas and disciplines. We'll just get more and more about vROps, and one thing that we will certainly do is get more community involvement as well, getting guests in, not just from VMware, but from people who are out in the field and delivering the product. So yeah, it's going to be awesome. 2017 is going to be great to watch this space.
All right. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for your partnership, and thank you, guys. I'll see you next year. Happy holidays.